This is Geek Gab with your host, John, and me, Daddy Warpig. We are back. Geek Gab for Saturday, July 21st, 2018. This is episode 149. We have had 148 prior episodes before today. And today we're going to be talking to Howie Bentley, a brand new writer, got an indie book released on Amazon. But before we do, John, how's your week?
Hello. It was a good week. I haven't slept enough, but I've gamed a lot, so it balances out in the end. How about you, man?
Have you got a TPK yet?
Negative. I've been playing in the 5th edition adventure Curse of Strahd, and as someone mentioned on Twitter somewhere, it feels a lot more like story time than a traditional D&D game. But you know what? There was a haunted house. There's a crypt below the haunted house, and I am crawling that dungeon old school style. 10-foot pole and everything. The DM doesn't know what to do with me.
Is it hard to get a TPK in D&D 5?
It is impossible to get a TPK in 5.
See, I've got a game I've been playing. I did a review of it called State of Decay 2. So it's a sequel to the original. Oddly enough, called State of Decay. And it banks itself on being a game with permanent consequences. That is, you're not allowed to save, and as soon as anything significant happens, they save for you. So when a character dies, that character is gone permanently. You will never, ever get them back. In the first game, lots of things could happen, many of them just chaotic, what they call emergent. Like, you're in a zombie apocalypse. So I sent a character into a house to do some searching for supplies. It was a really, really typical, typical mission the way I've done it times before. And all of a sudden, while he was in the house, a horde of zombies shows up. So there's, 10 to 15 zombies shows up. And then, as I'm running from them, the only way I can run is to run upstairs. My goal is to run upstairs and jump out a window because then I can escape. It'll be more difficult, but if I make it around the house to the car, I can start up the car and get away. Take some damage, but it should be fine. As I get into the room to jump out the window, my character is hurting and dying. There are a bunch of zombies in the room that I didn't notice before, or honestly, that just may have been spawned there. And I can't dodge past them to get to the window. And so the character just gets killed, torn to pieces, completely at random. That's in the first game. In the second game, after playing it for a long while, I discovered that is virtually impossible to happen. I have been, for various reasons, deliberately trying to kill characters as an experiment. And even if you take all your equipment away, so you have no guns, no hand-to-hand weapons, you send them into the most dangerous situation in the game, you actually have to work really, really hard to get your character killed. And it drains away the danger and hence, like, the tension of the game.
Yep, that's about right. It's you in order to get a TPK in 5th edition, you have to zero every single player's hit points at once. If everybody falls unconscious at the same time, you get your kill. Otherwise, there's free heals. 2 or 3 classes have a heal that they can use to save a dying party member. It doesn't even cost them their action. And the death mechanics are similar to modern death mechanics, where you go to 0 hit points and you go comatose, and you have to make some death saves. And if you don't make your saves, you finally die. But it takes something like 6 or 7 combat rounds to die.
And there are at-will, no-time automatic heals.
Yeah, it costs your level 1 spell slot to save somebody from death. And your first resurrection spell, you're gonna love this. Your first resurrection spell is available as a level 3 spell.
I'm not one of those people who, often says, "Oh, well, that you've changed this rule, and therefore this game isn't Dungeons and Dragons anymore. Oh no, you've changed the speed on falchions, and therefore this game is no longer D&D. Falchions are too quick." I'm not that kind of person. But I would say that at-will heals that take no time and no effort, can they be interrupted even?
Absolutely not. It has to be on your turn, but it's what 5th edition calls a bonus action. That's this sort of thing has evolved over the years of D&D. It's just basically an action that takes very little time. Most often it's used for like a quick buff spell or something like that, or drawing your weapon and can be a bonus action, that sort of thing. So it's a level 1 heal, and it's a very weak heal, because the trade-off is that you just cast it and you still get the rest of your turn.
I would say, just from your description, I understand I haven't played the game. I know that, so I'm not trying to go too far beyond what knowledge I have, but I would say that the number of consequential changes, that is, the number of changes that mechanic would introduce to the game, takes it out of the realm of traditional D&D. Just that one change, I think, makes it not D&D.
It is so powerful. It is so powerful. I have seen healers take it as their only level 1 healing spell. They would rather heal for a fraction of the damage as a bonus action than cast a Cure Wounds spell, because, and there's one thing that I didn't explain earlier. It's ranged. You don't have to lay on hands to cast this spell. It is the most amazing level 1 spell I've ever seen. Yeah, we've taken too long on this subject. It's impossible to kill a party in 5th edition.
And consequently, as my example was stated to K2 shows, it drains a lot of the tension away from the game.
100%.
Okay. Was there anything else that happened this week that we should know about, or should we introduce our guest?
Oh yeah, our long-suffering guest. Let's stop bullying.
We have a guest, folks. We have a guest on the show today, Howie Bentley, an author, and we've got some reviews. He's got a book out on Amazon. We've got some reviews from some people that listeners to this show may have heard of. And I will allow our guest to talk in just a second, because I want to read some of these reviews. These are reviews he included in his Amazon page, which is, in my mind, a really good move for the audience he's selling for. His series reminds me of 1970s Sword and Sorcery, along the lines of Carl Edward Wagner, or in Swords Against Darkness. There is a very memorable plot and secondary characters. I will remember this story in the future, which is one of the highest compliments I can give. That's Morgan Holmes on Castalia House blog. Where There Is No Sanctuary, the title of the story, by Howie K. Bentley, is a real punch in the face. This might be my favorite story in the issue. A werewolf warrior cuts his way through a demonic tower that has fallen out of time. lots of action, horror, and imagination. This is the kind of material that I read Kursova for. That's from Wasteland and Sky. Blackgate said, Bentley's prose is good and his sense of pacing on target. He's done a good job here, successfully melding mystery, creepy atmospherics, and bloodletting, creating a tale that would be right at home in one of Lynn Carter's or Andrew Offutt's anthologies. I can't give a story a better commendation than that. Fletcher Vredenberg from Blackgate. And last from P. Alexander at Kursova Magazine, who says about Howie Bentley's writing, pretty sure it gave me nightmares. And let me tell you, folks, I've never met Howie before. I don't know Howie. I decided, he contacted me and said, hey, I want to come on Geek Gab. I decided to bring him on the show just on the strength of those reviews. So, you want to come on the show?
I am here.
Hey, Howie, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, guys, I appreciate it.
That was your traditional Geek Gab welcome.
That was a great welcome.
So you've got a new book out, and it's not a novel.
Right. It's a collection of sword and sorcery tales that I've written over the last few years. Of course, two of those are new or original to the publication.
Are they all set in the same setting, or are they just thematically linked?
They are, for the most part, they're thematically linked. The only one that really isn't in the same setting, if memory serves me, is All Will Be Righted on Samhain, which is set in 62 AD in Britain and involves Boudica's daughter, which I gave her the name Bunduica. And so that's the only one that's, but it's related thematically to the rest of the stories. It just isn't set in the same world as the rest of the stories.
So you got a story into Kursova, which, oh, by the way, I have, of course, a link to the book in the description underneath the video. So check that out after the show. How did you get a story into Kursova?
Well, I just sent in, I wrote this story, and I had read about Kursova that was more, I guess, more PG. And some of my stuff is kind of, I call it hard as nails, sword and sorcery. It's more along the lines of what Carl Edward Wagner did, though I don't think it's derivative. I don't try to copy him, but it's somewhat like that. It's pretty grim, pretty dark, but not grim dark, I've been told. And so I went ahead, and I didn't really think they would publish it. I thought it would be a little bit too R-rated for Kursova, but Alex really liked it and published the story.
What is it that drove you to write Sword and Sorcery in an age when epic fantasy rules the trad pub publishing community? You come out with Sword and Sorcery, which was big in the 30s and the 20s, and Weird Tales heyday and the stories of Conan and all of that, but fell off when the so-called golden age of science fiction began in 1939, 1937, and despite various attempts to revive the genre, and despite long-running Marvel titles such as Red Sonja and Conan, it has not lasted long as a literary genre. At least, Andrew Offutt and some others tried to revive it in the 60s and 70s, and it just hasn't ever seemed to catch on again with a wide audience. What drove you to write Sword and Sorcery in the face of all that?
Well, I grew up in the 1980s, and there was somewhat of a resurgence there. I sometimes say that the 80s did for Sword and Sorcery with my generation what I guess the 1950s did for my father's generation with the Western, as far as exposing them to that through the cinema. I never intended to start writing. I was really into heavy metal music back in the 1980s, and of course, I enjoyed these things. And I read casually. I read the Lancer, Ace, Conan the Barbarian. The paperbacks, the ones that Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter had edited. That was all that was available at the time. And my school library also had a pretty good selection of the John Carter and Mars novels, though they didn't have the complete set. So that's what I enjoyed reading. But I was really into metal music and playing the guitar. And when I finally got to the point where I could form my own metal band, I just started writing the lyrics, and that's what I gravitated toward, because that's what I like to read, and I liked fantasy in music. I didn't like, the whining and the politics and the hippie social issues and all that kind of thing. I like the escapism, and so I started writing that kind of stuff, and that's what I've always been steeped in. And then a few years back, D.M. Ritzlin at DMR Books had contacted me. He was putting together an anthology of heavy metal, or of sword and sorcery stories written by heavy metal musicians. And I was like, well, sure, I'll give it a try. And I'd already written a story years ago, and it wasn't put together really well. And I sent it to a friend of mine, David C. Smith, who I admire a lot as an author. And he helped me out with it, revising the story, and gave me a lot of editorial suggestions and whatnot. And I got my first story published in Swords of Steel, is the name of the series from DMR Books. And that was All Will Be Righted on Samhain. That was my first story, and I kind of got hooked. I really enjoyed doing it, so I just kept writing sword and sorcery stories.
What is it about your stories that resonate most with, say, classic sword and sorcery tales?
That resonate most with classic sword and sorcery tales. Now, when you say classic sword and sorcery tales, are you talking about like the Robert E. Howard stuff and the Clark Ashton Smith and that sort of thing?
Sure. I mean, you've read those, I assume.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I've read all that stuff. Over the years, I really got into more so when I started getting attention for my lyrics in the metal band. I started going back and reading some of the authors I hadn't read, like Clark Ashton Smith. Of course, I'd read Howard when I was a teenager, read Burroughs when I was a teenager, and I got into Lovecraft when I was in my early 20s. And I just always enjoyed reading that kind of stuff. As far as what resonates with that particular stuff from then,
I mean, I don't want to make it to seem like I'm accusing you of copying, because...
Oh, no. What's the same as, I guess you're asking me, what is the same, the elements that are similar to what Howard wrote? Well, I mean, your basic sword and sorcery story is, the magic is usually of a malevolent nature, but, you're looking at a guy like Carl Edward Wagner, where or Michael Moorcock, their warriors were also practice black magic and involved in the black arts and whatnot. So I guess I kind of amped it up to that, to where with Howard's stuff, who's he's fearful, or not fearful, but he's magic is of a dubious nature, and so my stuff is not so much like that as it is more like the stuff that Wagner and Moorcock did, where you do have the barbarian swordsman, but he's also steeped in the sorcery as well. I don't know. That was a poor answer. That's about as best as I can do.
I want to put this out there, because this is a theory I've been sort of developing for a while. It's not even a theory. It's not like a big, heavy literary critique. It's just an analysis of the feeling of some works. It seems to me, looking back on it, that J.R.R. Tolkien melded classic knightly tales of honor and virtue, Dun City tales and things like that, with a Christian influenced mythology that doesn't specifically and explicitly include Christ. That's a fairly conventional analysis. I think it's fairly accurate. There's a lot of evidence to support that. When I look back at Conan, the original sword and sorcery tales, the core tales that all sword and sorcery came from, it seems to me, and I've been reading the Old Testament recently, so I've been reading David and Saul and Goliath. I've been reading Samson and Delilah. I've been reading the invasion of Canaan and the conquest of Canaan, all of that. And looking back on what Howard did with the Conan stories, he took that feeling of antiquity, of ancient morality and brutality, took all the Christianity out of it, took all the Hebrew religion out of it, and that's what you get with the Conan stories. The reason why they've been successful is that they touch some atavistic part of us with this kind of unconscious feeling of an ancient time where things were epic, where people were brutal and were highly motivated, or highly driven and passionate, and there were bad things out there. There were cults that did evil things, and Conan is a man set in this world of decadent ancient empires and such, and it's all very, very Old Testament influenced, or it resonates is the word I'm using, and maybe that's a bad word to use. Is resonates, because I guess that's kind of confusing, but that's just the way the feeling I get from reading Conan and reading the Old Testament is he built something that is emotionally evocative of the Old Testament tales without including Yahweh or Israel or their religion. And so I'm just developing this. It's a notion. It's not even a theory yet. Sorry, I had to mute you because we were getting an echo. And so, but you're back now. You're free now.
Okay, thank you for freeing me. No, yeah, an eye for an eye comes to mind when you mention the Old Testament and Conan in the same sentence. But yeah, I can see where you get that.
And so that's what I think the main appeal of sword and sorcery is it's evocative of antiquity. It's evocative of the Bronze Age. And I know for a fact that Conan is not set in a Bronze Age. You have people with steel swords and metal armor, and you have Victorian era pirates. It's a pastiche of all of these great, fascinating and vibrant times. But still the ethos, the morality is antiquity and not, say, Arthurian
definitely
legends. That's just my notion. I don't know.
Yeah, I can see that. David Gemmell also, you have that sort of thing, more so than Carl Edward Wagner or Michael Moorcock and some of the others. But yeah, I can see how it's what you're talking about. It's evocative antiquity. I haven't really thought about so much. I'm a poor writer when it comes to doing articles and analyses of this sort of thing. So my apologies if I'm not able to elaborate on analyzing these things.
Well, see, I know a lot of good writers, even a lot of good writers in the pulp revolution, who don't spend any time analyzing their own writing, which is fine. I don't want to criticize that at all. In fact, most of your very successful authors don't write spend a lot of time analyzing their own stuff. They're too busy making stuff, and it's like a centipede. Someone asked the centipede, well, how do you keep all those legs moving together? And as soon as he started to think about it, he stopped being able to do it.
So, yeah, I can see that.
It's like Sky Hernstrom, who has written a lot of the most loved works in the pulp revolution also write similar things. So if you haven't spent a lot of time analyzing it, that's fine. I wouldn't criticize that.
Oh yeah, I understand.
What is it that drives your stories?
What is it that drives my stories?
Yeah, you can go in a lot of different directions, and maybe you haven't thought about it. Maybe these are critics' questions. Maybe these are critics' questions that I should be asking other critics who are now analyzing things.
Well, when I am writing these stories, there's a sort of escape for me, just like reading the stories. And there's a sort of I would say they're testosterone driven. It's definitely male oriented stuff, but there's this element of rage and vengeance in these, like in metal music. And I would say if I had to point to one thing, that would be one element that I could say that drives these. Also, being able to write this kind of stuff was a good catharsis for me, because then when DM Wrestling originally contacted me, I think it was 2014. I just lost my wife to cancer, my wife and best friend of 27 years, and it was really a good catharsis for me to be able to get some things out and try to make sense of what happened, to be able to write. And it just came along at a good time. This thing did.
So you were mentioning magicians being this kind of suspect force in the Conan mythos, and then if you take the flip side, obviously Elric of Nibene, as far as I understand it, and I haven't been able to read any of the books because I've got a huge long list of things I need to read, and I'm focusing on stuff I have to doing direct research on right now. But from what I understand, Elric of Nibene was meant to be the exact antithesis of Conan. So whereas Conan was healthy and strong, Elric is, pale and spindly and weak. And whereas Conan opposes the evils of magic, Elric indulges in them, and he's really quite a nasty little fellow. So being on that spectrum from magic is evil and suspicious, and magicians are generally malign people doing things in malign ways, all the way to, oops, I killed a friend and fed his soul to my sword. Where on the spectrum do your stories usually land? Or it may be different, but where on that spectrum do your stories usually land?
Somewhere between, I would say, Howard and Moorcock or Wagner. One of my characters is Argentyr. Argentyr Fenris, or Argentyr Foila, as he's known in his homeland, which means, is Irish Gaelic, I understand, for a wolfman or werewolf. Argentyr is a barbarian swordsman who eventually becomes a king, much in the same way as Conan did. And he has a wolf mantle or a wolf hide that he wears. It's enchanted with an incantation, enables him to transform into a werewolf. So he uses magic to his advantage, but he's basically a good character. And these guys in these sword and sorcery stories, even Conan, he's not necessarily, he's kind of self-centered and he's really just out to survive, and he has his own agenda, but he's trying to he's usually in a situation because of some selfish deed on his part, but he always ends up doing the right thing because he's put in a position to where he has to. And I would say that my character Argentyr is a lot like that, more so than Elric, who is Elric almost strikes me as a character who has mental problems, that he does some really bad things, and he does some good things too, but there are a lot of bad, and it's because he's unbalanced.
So if you were to make a pitch to sell your book to the people listening, what would it be?
Make a pitch to sell my book to the people who are listening?
Yeah, convince them to buy your book. This is why it's awesome. Go buy it.
This is why it's awesome is because, well, it's classic sword and sorcery, but I think I put my own spin on it with the like I said, it's like the Howardian stuff where it's the character is not entirely bad or evil, but he does some selfish things to for his own agenda. That's not a good pitch. Let me try another one. Buy my book and escape for many hours into a land of antiquity and wonder and magic. I don't know. I don't really know how to pitch it. I would have to sit and think and write out something. But go to my website, www.howiebentley.com, and I think that should sell the book to you.
All right. Well, we are plummeting towards out of time here. But again, there's a link to the, book in the description. And I will get the link to your website from you after the show in the chat here, and add that to the description underneath the video. Now, my co-host, John, has vanished. Is he back?
Hello.
Hey.
Actually, I've just been delighted listening to Howie here about his book and everything. I did have one thing to add, and when you were talking about what the appeal of sword and sorcery is, it reminded me of a wise man's quote that I found on Twitter, and I'll read it to you. And this is part of the appeal of sword and sorcery fiction, sort of the same lines that Howie was saying earlier. Ancient men conquered cities and put them to sword and fire. Meanwhile, you go to the wine bar with your girlfriend and enjoy tasteful banter. That's what we're trying to escape to. We're trying to escape to that savage time, that Bronze Age time. And I hope I need to read this book because that sounds like a great escape.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on the show, Howie. I wish you best of luck with the book. I'll be, honestly, I will be looking forward to more stuff from you in Kosovo and other places. Let's just run through some stuff, folks. We have got next week is when the brand new Mission Impossible movie is coming out. So we'll probably be doing a review of that partially on this show and then talking about some other stuff. We are trying to get together a show with RPG Pundit and Jeffro to come on the show and debate issues of D&D. And from what I understand, looking at Google Plus, the RPG Pundit just launched another broadside against Appendix N. So I am absolutely sure that if we bring this off, that will come up in the discussion.
That's right. I already have Pundit and Jeffro signed on for next week. They've agreed to come on.
And Sky Hernstrom is releasing 2 new books in the month of August. And we've got him scheduled for, tentatively scheduled for the 4th, which is in just a couple of weeks, on the show to come on and talk about his new books and all the other things that are going on. And as well, PC Bushy and Kaiju Bushy have agreed to come on the show again to have some fun talking about whatever the heck things are going on. And that is honestly as far out as we scheduled, which is impressive. That's way far out than we normally schedule things. Things are usually way too hectic and people drop in and drop out and whatever. So those are what's coming up on Geek Gab. Sky Hernstrom, Kaiju Bushy, and PC Bushy, the Mission Impossible Fallout, and Jeffro versus the RPG Pundit in the D&D fight of the century. So thanks you all for tuning in to Geek Gab. We're available on youtube.com/GeekGab. We're available on SoundCloud, on the Google Play Store, and on the iTunes Store. Just do a search for Geek Gab. You can subscribe to us and listen to all our shows on the device of your choosing. If you like this video, click like. If you haven't subscribed, click subscribe, and be sure to double secret subscribe by clicking on the little bell icon so you can receive the announcements as to when we, your hosts, are going live. I want to thank everyone who is listening to the show later. Thank everyone who is listening to the show live. Once again, we had some discussion in the chat, which is preserved here on YouTube for you to read. I'm excited about all the stuff that's going on. So I want to say that it's unfortunate. We are leaving you for today. But don't you worry. Don't you fret. We will be back.